Today we're going to continue the conversation on my experience at Cape May. So we left off at the end of forming week. So today we're going to talk about the first weekend. The Friday that you pick up your new company and that whole weekend. You go through that first forming week that we talked about, and Friday afternoon you go and you get picked up by your actual company commanders. So you go back into that same classroom and you file in there with the whole forming company, and these three dudes walked in, Smokey the Bear covers. It was another level of intimidation. The looks on their faces I will never forget. And I was sitting there and watching them take their oath, and just deadpan, serious, eyes in the boat, and you realize how serious this is to them. I mean, this is a big deal. I mean, the rigors of becoming a company commander, it's incredible. So I was watching them, and I remember being like, holy shit, like it's about to get real. And it did. As soon as they gave their oath, the CEO kind of gave them the, here you go, this is your company, have at it. And it was instantaneous, just yelling, get up. It was kind of like getting off the bus, but to another degree. The stuff that I talked about before, about how we're all marching and nobody knows what they're doing, that happens here too. But it's worse because now you're actually in training. So your CCs are correcting you as you go along. So I remember marching as a unit down to where we were going to be in James Hall was where I was, and they were just doing like if you've seen the movie Full Metal Jacket, where Gunnery Sergeant Hartman is kind of just going down the line and picking people out, it was kind of like that, but while we were marching. So the lead CC came to me, and I don't remember actually even what he asked me, but he was asking me some specific questions, and he asked me if I was going to sound off. And I just yelled, sir, aye, sir, at the top of my lungs, like with everything I had in me. I was thinking like, okay, this is what it all was about, right? All those months of training and planning and, figuring out when I was going to ship out and enlisting. It was all for this moment. And I sounded off, and he's just like, not very impressive, and just walked away. And it was actually worse that he didn't yell. It felt more personal and dehumanizing for him to just say it like that with just a straight face. It was this 19-year-old kid who's just made the biggest decision of his life, and thinking like, okay, I'm gonna go out there and show them what I got, and they just break you down, they just strip you down. Like, no, that's not gonna work right off the bat. So I emphasize that because I think the point is just that that's something to expect, that you're not going to get it right at the beginning. And I've made videos talking about that as well, like the idea that the point is to fail, and that's basically what happens. So that really stuck with me, and that was just one moment at the very beginning of training, but that always stuck with me. So we continue on, we get to our squad bay, get assigned our lockers and our racks and all that stuff. And I remember that just that weekend was just a blur of just insanity, chaos. That first night we did the shower drills, which I know I've talked about that in prior videos. It's basically where we all were lined up, totally naked. We went through the whole nighttime routine, brushing, shaving, showering, where you'd have two people showering at the same time at the same stall. One person using the shower head and rinsing off, the other person scrubbing down and then switching off. And it was just like an assembly line of just yelling every step of the way, faster, faster, faster. And I mean, that was as bad as it sounds. I mean, whatever you imagine that experience was like, it probably was like that. It was very dehumanizing, very, stressful, but it's not that bad in the sense of, for me, I didn't really feel self-conscious because there's 40 other dudes with me that are all going through the same thing. So nobody's like looking at me, pointing anything out about me. So you have that going for you. I don't know. This was a long time ago. I've been in the Coast Guard for over 18 years now. So I don't know to what extent they still do shower drills, but it was just that first weekend, fortunately. So that was just part of that initiation. It was a lot of getting up really early and fire, on the loudspeaker, and alarms and sirens going, and we'd run out at 5 a.m. doing push-ups. This was like early October, so it was getting cold, it was dewy, and it's a shock to the system going through that. There was a lot of sizing us up, putting us through a lot of stressful situations, locking our locks together and things like that, and making us do things repeatedly over and over. There's a lot of that type of stuff, and just a lot of just PT. So, push-ups. And I talked before about when I talk about training for the physical rigors of boot camp, the big thing I always emphasize is getting in endurance shape. So being able to hold a plank is huge. Being able to stay in a really uncomfortable position is really critical. So don't worry too much about being able to knock out like 70 push-ups or 90 push-ups or 30 pull-ups in a minute or whatever. That's not really that important, especially in the IT side of physical training, meaning incentive training, training to as punishment, that kind of stuff when you're with your company commanders. When you're doing physical fitness testing, there's specific standards for that. But when we're just talking about that IT incentive training, your CCs are not going to really care if you can do 80 push-ups really fast with perfect form. It's about not stopping and going at their pace, because a lot of times they're going to tell you the pace of doing your push-ups. So that's why I really, really emphasize getting in endurance shape, not necessarily trying to get as strong as you possibly can, because the more muscle you build, the heavier you're going to be, which is going to make pull-ups and push-ups harder. You know what I mean? I mean, you're going to get stronger, but you're also going to have more weight to lift, so it kind of balances out. So really, I can't emphasize that enough. The better cardio and strength endurance that you have is really going to help you out a lot, especially in that first weekend. And of course, your mental fortitude is important as well. Being able to be right with yourself and, not letting that experience demoralize you, because it will for some. We did have somebody who actually ran away while we were getting beat down in the parade field. They just took off and ran, and the CCs just kind of laughed at them and told them, good luck, like you're not really going to get very far. But that kind of stuff will happen, and so that's why I always stress, really think hard about what your reasons are for joining. Keep those reasons in mind and think about that when you're struggling and you're questioning, because you might, I did, I questioned my decision for being there, and at some points I felt regretful about it. But then you have to look at the bigger picture and remember the reasons why you did it. That was kind of the general sense of opening weekend. I like to talk about that opening weekend separate from the next week, because it is kind of an interesting middle ground between that forming company week, where if you remember when I talked about that, it's very much like you're just a body and you're just going through medical and administrative stuff, you're getting yelled at, you're being told to march, but you don't really know how to march and nobody's teaching you how to march, versus when you go into training mode and they start investing in you as a future Coast Guards person. That first weekend is kind of in the middle of that. So you're still getting treated like scum of the earth. Sorry, there's not another way to put it. You're not treated really like anything other than just a recruit. Barely even that. They might even just call you E1. But they are starting the actual training process too. You know, they're doing physical training with you, which they don't do during forming week. And they start teaching you things. They start teaching you facing movements. You're kind of set up to screw up. So like they'll do things where they have you going in and out of a building for something to get something and then come back out, and people will forget to put their cover on. And so then you gotta do this thing. You actually have to put your hand over your head to cover. So things like that. They'll make sure, and it's also a numbers game. Right? I mean, you have enough people doing something, someone's gonna screw it up. So they want to make sure to have situations where people just screw up so that they can be made an example out of, and other people can learn from it. Don't worry about it too much. The one thing I will say, I like to talk about that first weekend because it's very unique, a unique part of the training. It's not forming week, but it's not purely Coast Guard education as so much as running people through the system to kind of weed out the people that maybe shouldn't be here. And it does get easier. And it's not just about do they yell at you less, do they not make you do as many push-ups. I'm not even talking about that so much as things start to have a purpose. And whenever something has a purpose, then it becomes a lot more doable, I think, anyway, in my experience. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. I just wanted to talk about my experience really from just the perspective of seeing it for the first time. I think it's going to be unique to everybody, but just be strong. It's cliche, but it's true. Be strong emotionally and physically. And before you go, if you are enlisting, really think about and really meditate on what are your reasons for joining, because that's going to be really important, and that's really going to help you when things start to get tough. So anyway, I hope that's helpful, and we'll talk to you all again soon.